Rise.
Please be seated. Thank you, Mr. Ord. Scarl.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, Mr. Ord, the GWC doesn't have its own premises, does it?
No.
And it doesn't have any staff of its own?
No.
So it's constituted by the GWC members and the department staff that perform the functions and responsibilities of the GWC under the GWC Act. Is that right?
Yes.
It doesn't have any infrastructure whatsoever?
Not physical infrastructure to my knowledge. Were there any assets that are accrued to them? Probably be process of the budget. They might be equipment like each of the commissioners has the members has provided with an iPad and things like that for meeting. So I imagine those assets would be Gaming and Wagering Commission assets.
Right. An iPad, what else?
I don't recall. There'd be a lot of other resources apart from the IT services that support the commission, that are commissioned.
So there's no printers or phones, anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. They may be provided with some of those things, but I'm not personally aware.
And all the resources are provided, apart from the iPad, by the department?
Yes.
And the IT support is provided by the department?
Yes.
And if we can go to your witness statement, please, at paragraph 31 on page 0009. Here you're referring to the situation I've just asked you about. You say the department undertakes all of the GWC's administrative tasks. And you go on to list them. You mention IT services there. And then you refer to policy development. So what is the policy development that you're referring to that the department undertakes on behalf of the GWC?
Well, apart from the various legislative instruments that are in statute, there are a series of policies that are published by the GWC related to the operations of Crown Casino. And from time to time, those policies are subject to review or change. The Gaming and Wagering Commission will give directions to what they want changed, what amendments are sought, and then that work is undertaken in the department and brought back for approval by the Commission.
I see. The next one is financial controls. What are the financial controls that you're describing there that the department undertakes, respective GWC?
That's the budget management processes. So our finance division will process the procurement of services. So GWC have a range of matters that they procure, particularly around audit of gaming machinery, things like that. So they will need to go through a normal state supply procurement process, and that all that sort of work would be done by departmental officers, department finance officers, and so on. The payment of the GWC members themselves would be there. Other expenses related to the holding of commission meetings and so on.
So the payment of GWC members, how is the department involved in that?
Once they're appointed, then we know that they have to be put onto the payroll system.
Whose payroll system?
It goes on to the departments, but on behalf of the GWC, so it's all accounted for within the GWC budget. But we hold those budgets within the financial system of the department.
Can I just, in that regard, take you back to paragraph 29 of your witness statement? And here you're talking about the funding of the GWC generally, are you?
Yes.
And you describe two sources of funds. And the first is funds appropriated and provided through the state budget process. You see that?
Yes.
Is that the main source of funding for GWC?
Well, they receive licence fees that relate to the casino licence, and they get some form of revenue from there, and then the state budget. But yes, it's the state budget's a major appropriation.
Well, let me just understand this. You identify the first source of funds as funds appropriated and provided through the state budget process. The second one, you say GWC also holds a modest cash reserve as equity and has drawn down on that reserve from time to time to meet unexpected costs or shortfalls. Is there a third source of funding, which is licence fee revenue?
The licence fee revenue supports the budget process that gives the Commission its budget.
All right, let me understand that. So that's part of the first source of funds
Yes.
you've identified. And the state budget process, if I can you tell me if I've got my understanding right here. The state budget process involves each year the relevant departments and agencies across the public sector making budget submissions to Treasury for the upcoming financial year. Is that right?
Yes.
And then Treasury prepares a state budget, which may or may not accept your budget submission in whole or part after negotiation, presumably.
Yes.
And the state budget is then submitted to Parliament.
Yes.
And there are some estimate committees hearings to sort of settle that state budget. Is that right?
Yes.
And then finally the budget that's accepted is made the subject of an appropriation bill that is passed through Parliament.
Yes.
Right. Now, the department prepares on behalf of GWC, does it? That aspect of the department's budget submission to Treasury.
Yes.
So, so there's a single department budget for your department, and within that somewhere you will see a separate budget for GWC. Is that right?
Yes. Separate line item in the state budget process right through to Parliament.
Right. Now, can I just take you to paragraph 28 above in your witness statement? So, as to state budget submissions made by GWC, these are outlined in a document that will be provided to the Royal Commission contemporaneously with this statement. And there's a footnote to footnote 7 with a document reference at the bottom of the page. So we go to that, please, dlg.0001.002.0011. And so you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, this is the document that's referred to. And the document talks about, in the top paragraph, first paragraph, neither the department nor GWC have identified any submission for additional state budget funding that has been made or approved. Now, what does that word additional refer to there?
Well, the process by which the Treasury seeks information on the Gaming Wagering Commission is an estimate from the department on forecast of the gaming revenue, recovery of costs and so on through fees and charges analysis and so on. So materially the Gaming Wagering Commission moves with the growth of the casino over time, and there's an allocation there. So there is from time to time small increases in the budget as a result of more turnover coming through and more activity at the casino. So in a sense that there's a small increase in the budget generally annually. So while that increase is modest, the Gaming Wagering Commission, given that it has held some reserves, hasn't had the need in my time to go forward and request additional funding on top of the available resources, either by way of the adjusted budget annually or by way of drawing down on the reserves of the Commission itself.
So do you mind if I just clarify something there before you go on?
Of course, yeah.
So when you are talking about state budget funding, you're talking about state budget funding to the GWC that could be comprised either of licence fee revenues from racing and gaming activities, or, beg your pardon, not racing, gaming activities, gaming and wagering activities, or over and above that, appropriations from Parliament. Is that right?
Yes, it'd be open to the Gaming Wagering Commission to seek to put a submission to the Expenditure Review Committee for additional funds to undertake activities on their behalf. And it's, of course, anticipated should we have to do something extraordinary like a suitability review or something of that nature that could be quite significantly expensive to undertake. And hence why we've been working on the basis that we're likely to put a submission forward shortly.
But up till this point, your 4 years as chairperson, 4 years or so, the GWC has never made a submission as part of a state budget process to get an appropriation from Parliament over and above the licence fee revenue that it generates from gaming and wagering regulation. Is that right?
It's not over and above the total budget for the Gaming Wagering Commission, which, as you say, incorporates funds that are derived from that and other sources.
I don't quite understand that. And looking at the statement of comprehensive income in the 2019-20 annual report of the GWC, I can't quite. Are you saying there is an appropriation from Parliament for the funding?
Well, Parliament signs off on the budget line for the GWC. The department, in all its activities, have a range of self-earned income and a range of expenses that need to be met by additional revenues through the budget. But all of those sources are aggregated into a single submission that goes before Parliament. So whether you're receiving those as fees and charges or licence fees or you're receiving those as budget appropriation, it all comes into one approved budget. And basically that's a budget with approval to expend to that sum because there is expenditure, the budget imposes expenditure limit on the department.
So are you saying that generally the GWC is funded by the state government over and above that self-generating income, fees and charges?
Yes.
So if I was to look at the statement of comprehensive income, is that there's a heading of income from state government there, and underneath that sports wagering account and problem game support fund, and that's, according to this statement, the only income the GWC receives from the state government.
Yes, we've got an allocation. I mean, we receive all the tax, we pay all the tax over, then we get money back to cover the cost of running the commission and some additionalities, and they're the additionalities.
Commissioner Jenkins, might I just interject here to say I can take Mr. Ord to that annual report and take him through the numbers so that that's clarified for you.
Thank you.
Just before you do that, could I ask, the document that's on the screen, what's the provenance of that document? Is it an extract from a larger document, or is it something that's just been prepared for the Royal Commission?
It was prepared as a statement for here, yes.
Thank you.
Before I take you to that annual report to clarify matters for Commissioner Jenkins, can I just ask you a couple of other questions, hopefully to aid the understanding of that document when we get to it. First of all, can I take you to a statement of information GWC provided pursuant to Section 8A of the Royal Commissions Act to this commission? The document is QNE.0001.001.0024. And if we go to the next page, at page 0035. So at 0025 is the start of, and 0035 you have authorised this statement pursuant to section 8A. You see that?
Yes.
And presumably when you authorised this section 8A statement, you satisfied yourself to the extent you reasonably could that the contents was correct. Did you?
Yes.
Can I tender that statement, 8A statement now, please?
Just the,
Commissioner?
is it the single page?
No, it's the
entire document?
entire document between pages 24 and 35. I'll read out the document ID again. QNE.0001.001.0024.
The document is admitted into evidence as an exhibit, and it will bear the document identifier number that Ms. Carl has just read.
Now at page 0026, you are responding to a question that began on the, request for information on the previous page about section 14.1 of the Casino Control Act, and whether there had been, if we just turn to page 0025 so we get the sense of it for you, Mr. Ord.
Mm-hmm.
It says, for the period 2010 to date, provide details of the annual amounts of money which were provided to the GWC pursuant to section 14.1. Can we just show Mr. Ord section 14.1 of the Casino Control Act, please? Says the funds available for the administration of this Act, being the Casino Control Act, money from time to time appropriated by Parliament, casino gaming licence fees, and all other monies lawfully received, etc. Now, the answer to the question in the Section A statement is that no monies were appropriated by Parliament. And that's because, is it, that GWC was relying in the budgeting process simply on the licence fees it received from Perth Casino? No additional funding was provided by Parliament.
We didn't seek additional funding, that's correct, but of course our use of licence fees is appropriated through the budget process through Parliament. So we took the question to be, were we seeking additional funding outside of the funds that have been identified as the funds needed to regulate the casino, and we hadn't put in an additional submission above the normal budget submission.
Now that's the position under the Casino Control Act. If we can go to section 9 of the GWC Act, please. Section 9, and pull out subsection 1. So a similar look for the GWC Act. The funds available to the Commission are appropriated monies from Parliament and interest accrued or monies otherwise lawfully received. And the position in terms of budgeting was the same, wasn't it, under this Act, that GWC's budget included, has up until now, included only the monies otherwise lawfully received without including or seeking any additional appropriation from Parliament?
Yes, except for the extent that Parliament meets the cost of additional staff costs and overheads of the department. The GWC makes a contribution based on the amount of effort that they draw on, and that's agreed in the budget, which comes out of their appropriation and is budgeted. But expenditure over and above that the department outlays, particularly around staff wages, infrastructure and so on, isn't recouped, so it is supported through the budget to that extent.
But I'll just make sure I understand this fully. When the department's preparing GWC's budget on its behalf, it prepares the budget up until now routinely on the basis that the budget is comprised only of the expected receipts from licensing revenues.
For their recoup, yes.
Yes.
That's correct.
And that budget is then, as part of the overall department budget, submitted to Parliament.
Yes.
And when it's approved, you're describing that in your evidence that you're giving as an appropriation of those licensing fees to the budget of GWC. Is that right?
That's correct.
But there's no additional appropriation that Parliament provides.
No.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, they do provide funds, given that the whole of the racing, gaming, liquor division is part, provides resources from time to time. There's a lot of aggregated resources that goes into supporting GWC. So there is an element of the department's appropriation which is not necessarily covered by that piece of the appropriation that GWC receives from its licence.
But what
fees.
you're talking about there is not anything that GWC has any control over
No,
in the
that's
funding sense.
absolutely correct, yes.
Can I just need to ask you one quick question about that document we were at a minute ago, DLG.0001, yes, 0002.0011. Just that second paragraph there, where did you write these paragraphs or is it somebody else?
This particular one, I think probably I did, yes.
Yes, and you're talking about a recently commenced due diligence and background analysis of the Blackstone Group. You see that?
Yes.
And how much do you expect that to cost?
Well, it's of course become more complex because there's many other parties beyond Blackstone that will have to have another separate due diligence undertaken potentially. But in case of Blackstone, we estimated the cost somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000.
And your apprehension is that the GWC might not have sufficient funds from its existing budget to meet that expense?
Yes, given other demands on the Commission at this time, then I would seek, although ultimately some of those costs are recoverable under the Act, I would seek to ensure that we didn't put the Commission in a situation they couldn't apply the full due diligence they needed because the funds weren't available to do whatever that work was required. So the solution to that would be that I'd make a submission to the ERC on the basis that this was critical and important work.
Now, if I can take you back to your witness statement on page 0028, please, paragraphs 92 and 93. Do these paragraphs describe your understanding of how the department prepares a budget submission for GWC?
Yes.
Or is it, no, sorry, I'll withdraw that. And is that budget prepared by the department and submitted to Treasury as part of the overall budget submission for the department?
It's prepared by the department for the Commission's review and adoption and submission to government.
Yes, but when it is adopted by the Commission, is it submitted as part of the department's overall budget
State
submission?
budget process, yes.
As part of the department's overall budget submission?
Yes.
And as the Director General of the department, you must approve the whole budget submission on behalf of the department?
I submit the budget, so I would approve the papers going to the ministers, and then the ministers approve the submissions that go through to the Treasurer, and then the process of review of the entire budget is undertaken through the Expenditure Review Committee process.
But in your role as Director General, when you're, if you will, settling the overall department budget for it to be provided to the Minister, you would have to make evaluative decisions, wouldn't you, across all the different areas of the department's budget as to where to focus resources in the coming year?
There hasn't been very much discretion in that regard because the budget process has been fairly restrictive of what the parameter changes can be. And although we're one department, our budget is appropriated by division related as if we were the departments we were before we amalgamated. So essentially the funds that were available to sport prior to amalgamation remain sport and so on by division. So to the extent that there's been any melding of resources that's at a staff level where, for instance, we don't have 4 finance divisions or 4 payroll divisions, we've consolidated those. But when it comes down to areas of service delivery, such as regulation of racing, waging, gaming, then that budget framework remains as it was prior to the machinery of government change.
And is your point that as things presently stand and the experience you've had in the last 4 years as Director General of the amalgamated department, there's not much room, if any, to apply for any increased funding in the budget process beyond that that you had this year and the years previously?
Yes, I mean, obviously when machinery of government took place, there was a state fiscal crisis, so the budget directions from the Treasurer was that, we had to restrict our budget parameter changes to parameter changes that would exist through, for instance, as I've said, if there were changes to Crown turnover, there'd be more tax coming in or whatever, those parameter changes will be recognised, but there wasn't an avenue where we were, where they sought for us to put submissions forward for new or additional activities related to any of our oversight or service delivery items. There were, of course, a number of election commitments which were particularly costed and added to the agency and were delivered by the agency in accordance with those budgets.
Right, now coming back to paragraph 92, the second sentence, you say all functions and responsibilities of the GWC are in principle treated equally, with resourcing dictated by, amongst other things, work priorities, etc. Is the point you're making here at paragraph 92 that the budget that is put forward by the department for GWC in any given financial year, put forward without regard to the specific resourcing or budgeting requirements of the different areas of regulation, racing, casinos, etc.?
Yes, it supports those regulatory functions, but it isn't broken down at a micro level to so many hours, so many people on so many particular things. But of course, the casino operates under an operating manual with very prescribed compliance cycles of checks and audits and so on. So it is a historic framework budget based on a work program approach. That doesn't vary enormously, but the Commission itself may have some particularly priorities that they wish additional work to be during the annual cycle, and that's where most of the discussion around the budget and its application would be. There are a few kind of periodic processes that come up every few years that will need additional time, and they are identified at that time when we're doing that. Otherwise, it may be particular issue of concern, and more time is put into side in looking into that.
Has the existing resources needs for casino regulation, to your knowledge, ever been actually quantified by either the department or the GWC?
I'm sure it was quantified. I think that by the time I came in, the regulation framework for the casino was well established and didn't change in the time between then and when we started dealing with issues related to the matters that have been before us over the last 12 months, including the pandemic and everything else that's gone on. So a lot of things have changed, but the actual framework for how the casino was regulated was well established prior to that and hasn't been altered in my time.
And costed?
Well, it hasn't been recosted in my time, no.
Since 2017?
No.
And have you inquired into when it was last costed?
No, not. I haven't inquired into that, no.
Paragraph 93, and you gave evidence along these lines a little while ago, I think, when you are describing how the budget is proposed for the GWC in any given year. You talk about it being based on previous years' performance with allowance for projected movement in regulatory activity and known future expenditure items. How does the GWC go about estimating the projected movement in regulatory activity?
The staff do quite a lot of work on the forward year's activities, what needs to be covered in audit program, in cyclical reviews and so on that are there, and they cost those because obviously the market changes and cost of doing audits increase and so on. So they go through and have a look at what is going to be required for the year to meet their compliance requirements. That is costed up and informs about part of the budget papers and brought to the Commission.
But isn't the budget for GWC in substance constrained by the licensing revenue that comes in?
Well, as I indicated, that the Going Waging Commission keeps a relatively healthy reserve, and that's acknowledging that you could end up needing to draw down from the reserve to increase the budget for a particular year to undertake additional activities. That's why we keep a reserve fund there. So there is a balancing opportunity to draw down, if required, from the reserve fund. The program and the funds that Parliament's appropriate or allowed us to keep out of the fees to operate the Commission to date have met the program's compliance needs, because obviously it's iterative with Treasury's costs. We advise them and they've made adjustments as required.
But Mr. Ord, does the regulatory program dictate the budget, or does the budget dictate the regulatory program?
Well, I consider that the regulatory program actually determines the budget, but the regulatory program's been very stable for a long period of time. So the budget doesn't alter enormously year by year except for incremental growth.
But if the regulatory activity was to be increased, is it your view that GWC should look to its reserves to fund that rather than seeking an additional appropriation from Parliament?
No, it's just the reserves would enable an immediate response to a matter rather than wait for the resolution of a long, what is a fairly long budget process. But if we understood that we needed to add or significantly change the regulatory framework, then that would be subject to a budget bid for adjustments in the budget of the Gaming Wagering Commission, and that would be submitted as part of the next year's budget process. So reserves provide the flexibility within an annualised budget to do something, but that wouldn't become the long-term way of funding any additionality or requirement to do something special.
And what are the GWC's reserves currently?
I think about 1.5 million, something like that.
Now, there was a second Section A statement of information provided by GWC to this commission on the 22nd of April 2021. That is QNE.001.001.001. And at page, if we just go up to the beginning of the document, please. You'll see that this is the beginning of the responses to the statement, to the request for a statement of information, and at page 0012, where we were before, it's signed by Fiona Roche, who you mentioned before lunch, I think, is the Acting Director General of the department.
Acting Deputy Director.
I'm sorry, Acting Deputy Director.
Yes.
That's just an error, is
Yes.
it, in how she's signed it off? We don't need to worry about that.
I've just something I don't know yet.
I said there was something we don't need to worry about it moving forward. But this first part of this Section 8A statement, are you aware, was prepared by the department?
Yes.
And why did Ms. Roche sign this document rather than you?
The timeframes for turnaround of documents have been exceedingly tight, and I tasked Fiona with responding to matters where, if I was unavailable on other matters, I've obviously got 5 new ministers, so I've had a lot of briefings to do with ministers, and if I wasn't available to sign off and there was any risk that we wouldn't have met the time frame, then Fiona was delegated to sign on my behalf.
Did you have any involvement in the preparation of that first part of the statement of information?
Not specifically.
Well, at all? Okay. Now, there's a second part of the statement that commences at page 0014, responding to items 17 and 19. And that was prepared by GWC itself, we are told, not the department. Are you aware of this response?
No, I haven't.
Have you read it?
I haven't had the opportunity to read it. No.
No. Do you know who prepared it?
I understand we engaged assistance for the Gaming Wagering Commission to meet and work through their response themselves, and we also provided independent legal counsel.
So when you say we, are you talking about the department?
Yes.
So do you know who within GWC provided instructions for the preparation of this second part of the document?
As I understand, if this is on behalf of the Commission, then it would have been the Commission members.
And you don't know who within the membership?
I think they met apart from me, all the others met and worked through the response.
All right,
and
now,
prepared it.
thank you. At page 0019, if you go down about 2/3 of the way down the page, there's this section that is headed Inadequacies, and it's responding to a question: are there any inadequacies in the existing regulatory framework? We'll just have to pop that back in so I can read the heading for you, the question, which need to be addressed and how should they be addressed. And then under this heading of inadequacies, the GWC talks about how these inadequacies should be addressed and talk about the need for an independent chair, and we'll return to that in a moment. And then it talks over the page about resourcing. and talks about the resourcing being embedded within the department and it not having dedicated resources to draw from, and then mentions that it is required to compete for finite resources. Would you, across various portfolios, would you agree with that statement?
I can certainly understand the perspective of the members in preparing this statement.
Well, do you agree that that correctly set out the position that the GWC is required to compete for finite resources allocated across various portfolios, presumably various department portfolios is what they're referring to?
I'm not sure whether they're referring to across government or within the department. If it's across government, then yes, it's it's a competitive process, obviously related to resources that need to be deployed on high priorities within government, and we don't have a blank check, that's for certain. But I don't believe that it accurately reflects that they are put in any form of competition within the department, because as I said, that's a line item in the budget. Their resources can't be moved somewhere else, and apart from the fact that there were efficiencies made as a result of machinery and government, I believe the GWC have had the same access to the same resources as they had previously. I think they're probably indicating that they believe there needs to be more, given the greater risk that's been uncovered in the Bergen inquiry.
Right, if we go to page 0022, please. And this is a response to item 19. In the second paragraph, commencing the consequential, I'll go back to the first paragraph so you get the sense of what's being put here. So I'm aware you haven't read this before. The GWC's reiterates that the GWC's functions, the resources available for it to discharge its functions are embedded within the department. It doesn't have dedicated resources, and the resources that are available must be managed by the department having regard to competing priorities. Clearly departmental portfolios that are being considered there. Would you agree with that statement?
That the GWC doesn't have dedicated resources is correct, in that there are only a couple of officers whose sole responsibilities lie there, and of course in that case they are looking at the broader remit of racing, wagering and the casino. Otherwise, staff are deployed on a range of regulatory functions across the whole division.
But do you agree with the sense of the statement in this paragraph that GWC is in a position of having to compete for resources that finite resources that the department has available across different portfolios?
Well, yes, if they had sought to seek additional resources, then I would agree. They would then, it would mean if I was told to self-fund it, I'd have to take that from somewhere else in the portfolio, which, as I indicated, is very difficult in the way the budget's structured. So yes, I can understand it's probably the availability of staff and staff time, given the general demands on staff of a range of regulatory activities.
It goes on to say consequential issues arising from those competing priorities have been exacerbated over recent years, loss of a number of key people, and with them expertise and corporate knowledge through retirement and voluntary redundancies. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
The result has been unavoidably that reduced departmental resources have been managed to meet both the demands of a broader departmental portfolio and the increasing demands arising from the rapid changes across the race. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I certainly think that the changes that are affecting the racing and wagering and casino industries, particularly driven by technology, have put, significant demand on the resources we have available to regulate it.
Then goes on to say this has made it practically impossible for department staff to address all of the requests and requirements of the GWC in a timely manner or at all, in particular the GWC's strategic and macro environmental policy considerations. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't, and the reason I don't is that that is a statement that isn't made conditional on the reality that we've been in for since early 2020 in the COVID situation. Under a state of emergency, the department's staff and resources were prioritised in dealing with the pandemic. So a whole range of matters related to things that we would have normally done for the Gaming Wagering Commission were put on hold to deal with the pandemic. I might say also the Crown went into closure, reopening, and various other things. So I can understand that the pandemic isn't the members of the Gaming Wagering Commission's concern. Their concern is their statutory responsibilities at the Commission level. But it's more the pandemic from my perspective and the need to reallocate people to deal with the crisis that has inhibited in the last 12 months or more of us undertaking things on behalf of the Gaming Wagering Commission that clearly they were keen for us to progress. And that was really around strategic risk assessment, strategic planning, and so on. We had to focus on making sure that the Crown compliance was upheld at the operating table level, because a failure there would be catastrophic as well. And so a range of things we would like to have done we haven't been able to do because, as I said, I've had to redeploy staff for a range of COVID-related activities.
All right, now can I take you back to your witness statement at page 0035, paragraph 122, please? You say, in your view, the support provided to the GWC by the department has been adequate to address regulatory issues relevant to Perth Casino, with the exception in relation to risks, which is defined to be regulation of junket tour operators, money laundering risks and cash and electronic transaction risks, and criminals infiltrating casinos. So is your evidence that apart from those risks, the departmental support of GWC has been adequate, except to the extent that COVID-related issues have stretched resources of the department, which have then not been available to the GWC?
Yes, because obviously from 2019, mid-2019, in reporting on where the Bergen inquiry was going, I was obviously as chair and the chief casino officer informing the Gaming Wagering Commission that we would need to consider potentially having much greater oversight of a range of emergent issues and risks that have been brought to my attention through my engagement with that inquiry. And so they were obviously were realising that we had a whole range of additionalities from the oversight of the compliance of Crown's operating procedures, policies and so on, and that was in the form of these risks, reviewing the adequacy or the lack of regulations over junkets was one, obviously, and then looking at whether there are opportunities for us to look at corporate governance issues and the audit and risk issues around the bank accounts and gaming transactions.
So this is going to require some increased funding, do you anticipate?
it's a whole level of additional capability to undertake that work. Our staff are structured to look at what happens on the gaming floor and observing and testing that Crown's compliance with the operating model is appropriate, but forensic analysis of banking transactions, corporate changes of the way the corporation's structured and so on, would definitely require us to engage in strategic forensic financial skills and so on that we currently don't have in the department. We could procure those, but it would be a whole additionality to the current regulatory framework for Crown. And yes, we both need both a policy response, I suspect, a legislative response, and a resourcing response to put that into effect.
Well, a resourcing response is an appropriation, a specific appropriation from Parliament to increase the funding of the GWC. Is that right?
That's how it would be translated, yes.
But as I understood your evidence a little while ago, that's not easy to achieve in your experience of submitting budgets on behalf of the department.
Well, it's difficult to get funds for, where the consideration is that you've been adequately resourced to do the tasks you've been given. If it's clear that you have to do additional tasks that you haven't been funded for, then the cost and demand pressure part of the budget enables you to come forward with the exceptionality of that. And I think the grounds, obviously, in this case would be there to indicate that an area that we had not been actively regulating and investigating needed to be included, and there would be a cost to that. Then I would anticipate that would be quite a reasonable submission to put before the budget.
Moving away from that topic, but still to do with budgeting and finances, Mr. Ord, does the GWC have its own agency special purpose account?
I would imagine so. I wouldn't want to not answer you accurately, so I'd need to check with my financial officer.
Of the department?
Yes. Who would maintain the special purpose accounts, but it does sound like one where we would.
I was just about to ask you who controls, if GWC does have a agency special purpose account, who controls it?
The Chief Financial Officer of the department would have oversight of all bank accounts or special purpose accounts that we have.
And who is permitted to operate the accounts, the special purpose accounts that the department has control over?
Well, it's exercised through the accountable authority, which is myself. Clearly, we do that on advice. Advice would be sent to me on this activity is going to be related to this particular account that we're maintaining, and I'd be the approving authority for that transaction. And
do the members of the GWC themselves, apart from you, ever become involved in controlling or operating the special purpose account, if GWC has one?
Yeah, no. Those members, the accountable authority principle would be that I took responsibility for approvals at a transactional level. They approve the budget as at the higher end, and they get financial reports on a regular basis each meeting on how the budget has been expended and on what. And they question that quite regularly. It's got down at quite a granular level.
Right, now I'm going to take you to a document that I think Commissioner Jenkins was looking at a little while ago, which is the 2019 GWC annual report, which is pub.0002.001.0658. And at 0689, if we can go there, please. we're in the financial statements section of the annual report. And we have expenses and revenue items there in the usual way. Can we look at the revenue first, please, Mr. Ord? And we see there user charges and fees of about $4.2 million. Those are essentially the licensing and other fees paid by Perth Casino and other bodies that need to be licensed by the GWC. Is that right? Or in relation to the GWC commission?
Yes.
And that larger sum of $90.3 million or thereabouts, that's a racing bet levy, is it, in terms?
That's money paid through our accounts around income received from that purpose, yes.
Now, if we go back to the expenses and pull those out, you see that large sum of about $94 million going out to restricted cash and special purpose accounts. If we look at note 2.3 at page 0695, we just pull out note 2.3. You'll see that there are largely amounts paid to different entities such as the Gaming Community Trust and so forth. But mostly the largest component is the racing bets levy payment to Racing WA. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Now, if we come back to the expenses at page 689, and we see the service and contracts fees of $4.2 million there. Look at note 2.2 at page 695. Are those amounts paid to the department?
Yes.
And I want to come back to 2.2, but if we can just come back to 689, just so that I can establish something here and pull out the expenses, please. Is it the case, therefore, that for the 2020 period, the income of the GWC was effectively dispersed primarily on the distribution of grants and levies, then to the department, and then to board members for their remuneration?
Yes.
And if we go back to item 2.2, please, on page 695, how are the professional services in the amount of $4.14 million quantified?
That's where the budget details are provided, which is the recoup of staff costs and a range of other expenses related to servicing the Commission's program, including the work program costs that are within that.
But what you described before lunch was for the regulatory services division of the department, particularly in relation to racing, gaming and liquor, that the officers had responsibilities spread across a range of responsibilities. So how do you actually quantify what time they were spending on different activities, in particular casino regulation?
Well, this is, again, it's a contribution to the overhead costs of the whole division of racing and gaming, and this is an agreed sum that was historically paid and adjusted each year and accounted for by the activities program that goes with it. So yes, staff might be 50% a casino and 50% on racing. They weren't acquitting that on they put in timesheets, of course, but they weren't acquitting it on an activity-based working model where they were accounting for their hours like a law firm or something.
Can I take you back to to page 689? And looking at the revenue, the user charges and fees, including the amount of which amounts to $4.263 million, $264 million. That includes casino licensing fees, does it?
I believe so, yes.
So when we go to the expenses that I just had up at page 695, item 2.2, how do we know whether the casino licence fees are actually expended on casino regulation or something else?
Well, the total, you'd know that the total RGL staffing cost is X. The casino is making a contribution of the $4 million. That represents, a percentage of the time of the department, and those officers that are working on that should equate to that. Their work time should equate to that sum.
Do they keep timesheets?
They do keep timesheets, yes.
And is that then...
But not down at an activity-based recording.
What do you mean? So they don't actually record when they're working on casino regulation as opposed to any other form of regulation?
Well, no, because they're working for the Gaming Wagering Commission, which of course covers more than casino, covers, horse racing and greyhounds and lots of other things. So they're meeting the cost of servicing the Gaming Wagering Commission's totality of overall responsibilities, and of which a high proportion of that is the compliance regulation of the casino.
How do you ascertain whether the money that's received by way of licensing fees in the Broad, whether or not they're actually dedicated to gaming GWC work exclusively or not? How do you ascertain?
I think the view was it's received by the department as revenue, essentially revenue for the state, and it is then provided to the department to provide for the needs of the Gaming Wagering Commission in total. It isn't accounted for on the basis of an exact accounting match of the licence fee revenue and the activities the Gaming Wagering Commission are undertaking. Other things such as my time related to Crown is met through consolidated revenue. It's not charged back through this model.
But what about GWC work in its entirety? So you've got the revenue coming in, 4.2 odd million in totality. How do you ascertain whether that money is actually spent exclusively on GWC support or whether it's spent on just regulatory services or other aspects of the department's portfolios?
Well, as I said, but because of the work program agreed by the GWC and meeting that work program and the hours put aside to undertake the work program, and that has been historically costed, and we've stayed within that appropriation.
So is it costed every year?
We do, as I said, we run a budget process, so we go back to GWC saying this is our estimation of what it's going to cost to run these activities, and there are adjustments made, as I said, to the budget, really based on historical increases in the revenue available to the Commission.
So do you, for example, charge GWC for the use of inspectors on an hourly basis?
No, it doesn't work like that. It is literally a provision for the Department to provide services for the Commission, and we provide those services. So it isn't a cost for service model to the extent we get down to the micro detail of accounting for every hour, everything that's been done. That's been a historical arrangement and has continued.
Well, if it's not done at the micro level, what's done at the macro level to get a sense of the value of the services provided to GWC?
Well, we report on all the activities that we undertake.
But how are they costed?
Well, they're costed by the fact that the staff have to put the time in to have to contract audits and so on. So, as I said, it's a work program. It occupies a high percentage of the time of some 33 staff, and we have to make an estimate of what that salary cost is going to be. If we didn't receive the funds, we'd have to lower the number of staff available.
So is there some budgeting process that's done where you look at the number of staff within the regulatory division, what they're doing, how much their salaries are, and then you apportion the receipts from GWC across?
Yeah, essentially, yes. And the balance is made up from the general appropriation.
And do you try to match the value that GWC gets in terms of the amount of time staff spend on GWC work versus other work?
There's definitely high priority, obviously, given to the statutory compliance function. So the staff have their priority to undertake the work that is required of them to meet the agreed inspections, audits, program and so on that GWC sets. So from that perspective, yes, the GWC sets the work programs and the staff have to work to that. And then the staff that work to that, the costing or a wage contribution comes from the GWC to meet salary costs associated with that program.
Right, can I take you back to where I was some time ago at paragraph 31 of your witness statement on page 0009, and that was a digression when I asked you about the administrative task of financial controls that the department undertakes for GWC. Your next item is communication with the Crown. Is that a spelling error? Do you mean Crown or the Crown as in the state?
Communication with Crown, yes.
Crown Resorts?
Yes.
Or Perth Casino? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
So it's the department that does that rather than GWC?
GWC regularly meets with Crown through invitations for Crown to attend GWC meetings. They've also, as commissioners, either individually or as a group, met on site at the casino. They have obviously potentially have the powers to request to go and see anything, but they normally ask to go and see elements of the operations or monitoring systems, how a new game might be rolled out, that sort of thing. So very active from that perspective in face-to-face engagement. And then the more formal letters from Crown seeking approvals from the Commission would come generally addressed to me as chair, and then be processed through the department and then included in the agenda papers for meetings, along with proposed papers and responses to prepare ability to respond to Crown from those submissions.
All right, but I'm just trying to understand your evidence here at paragraph 31. You say the department undertakes all of GWC's administrative tasks, including communication with Crown.
Yeah, so the formal communication of letters, notices, directions all come through the department to Crown, following approval by the GWC.
And do you mean they're in the name of the department, or simply that the department prepares those documents on a GWC letterhead?
They would be, a lot of them are formalised GWC documents because of the approvals process, and then they'll be submitted as GWC communication. I might respond to a general letter in my capacity as the chair or my capacity as the Director General.
What do you mean by that?
Crown just writes to me on just asking a matter. We've got something coming up. We'd be interested in the GWC's involvement or whatever. Then I might write back and say thank you very much. Noted it. I'll make the Commission aware.
But will you sign it as the chair of GWC or as the Director General of the department?
Well, if it was directed about the GWC business as chair of the GWC, Crown obviously writes to me as Director General because of other portfolio responsibilities.
Now, you say here at 31, the department undertakes all of GWC's administrative tasks, including communication with the Minister and external agencies, and reporting to the Minister and Parliament. So again, do you mean that the department actually has those communications and reports, or that it just simply administratively prepares the documentation for the GWC to sign and approve?
Yes,
the latter. The GWC annual report is approved by its members before it's tabled in Parliament, is it?
Yes.
And similarly, any reporting to the Minister is done with the approval of the GWC board?
Yes, but it's formal reporting. In terms of my role in meeting with the Minister regularly, then I will meet with the Minister in my capacity as Director General, but there'll be an agenda item on racing, gaming and liquor in general, and I'll report on matters related to the GWC in those meetings.
Right. If I just ask for the GWC Act to be pulled up at section 7F. This is one of the duties of the GWC to advise the Minister as to any matter relating to gambling. To your knowledge, in the 4 years that you've been chair, is it the department that does that, or is it GWC?
Well, GWC have written to the Minister around matters that the Minister needs to make consideration of, some notices and directions and so on, changes of games, I think. So those formal communications will go through the Minister from the GWC. And then just general reporting on matters that the GWC are considering would be provided to the Minister for, his awareness. So the Minister was kept informed of GWC activity generally within my briefings.
And when you mentioned a moment ago these regular meetings that you have with the Minister, is it in effect an agenda item to talk about GWC matters amongst other things in your portfolio?
Generally, yes.
And when you're having that discussion of the agenda item, Do you have your GWC chair hat on or your Director General of the department hat on?
Well, if I'm talking about GWC, I have my GWC hat on. If I'm talking around general matters of the nature of the department or its resourcing or something, I'll talk to him as the Director General.
What about when it's the resourcing of GWC? Which hat do you have on then when you're talking about with the Minister about the resourcing of GWC?
Well, I'll advise the Minister, obviously, when preparing the budget papers, as we've discussed, and the budget papers go up to the Minister, that the GWC has approved the budget that's been submitted, and I'll do that in my capacity as Chair. If the Minister should the Minister raise concerns about the budget papers, then I'd respond as Chair or bring the matter back to the Commission.
Not as the Director General?
Not in that case, no.
Right. What about...
Because the budget is approved at GWC board level.
You raised a little while ago the possibility that just depending upon the regulatory activity that the GWC might contemplate undertaking going forward, that then one could envisage that there might be a need to approach Treasury for an appropriation from Parliament over and above what's received by way of licensing fees to fund that. You recall that discussion we had a little while ago. So if you were going to meet with the Minister to advance a case for that additional appropriation, would you have your Director General hat on or your GWC Chair hat on when you did that?
Well, essentially I'd have a component of both. As the accountable authority, I have to be cognisant of my responsibility to a whole range of legislation related to what an accountable authority does. So matters of budget consideration, I have to have a view of it as the Director General. But in terms of the purpose of why the GWC believes it needs additional resources and the merits of that case, I'd be purely the Chair of the GWC. I'd advocate on behalf of my colleagues on the Commission.
You might not have had time to reflect on this and you might want that time, so you should say so if you do. But has it occurred to you that if you were wearing both hats in that scenario, there might be a potential for a conflict between the interests of the department and the interests of GWC?
I think if you read my transcript, my evidence, I've said that I believe that having an independent chair of the GWC would remove any belief that holding the concurrent role of Director General puts me in the difficult position of, on the one hand, having an interest in limiting the demand for additional resources or whatever, and on the other hand, advocating on behalf of the GWC. So absolutely, I understand that is a tension. I don't believe it's a tension that can't be adequately managed because at the end of the day, I don't determine the resources available to the department. That is determined by Parliament. And ultimately, of course, there's a whole process that goes before that. So, the process of bringing forward submissions and advocating is a robust one. And there's no reason why you wouldn't consider it could be successful. We hadn't identified a reason over and above the matters I put in here about belief of future requirements or to undertake due diligence on changes of ownership to seek those additional funds at this time. But I could envisage a future where independent chair meeting with the Minister to discuss the resourcing requirements of GWC would be an effective process, and in which the Director General would be providing a different level of advice based on the overall capacity of the department potentially to support that need.
Right, can I move to a different topic here and come back to your witness statement at page 0016, paragraph 50, that's 50. When I say different topic, it actually flows neatly from what you were just giving evidence about, Mr. Ord. And here in the last couple of sentences, you are expressing views or sort of recording that you have expressed views to the Public Sector Commissioner in February of this year that GWC would benefit from amendments to its Act to provide for an independent chairperson. And can you just explain, apart from that resourcing issue that we just talked about, the other benefits you perceive from that independence?
Well, my belief is that this is somewhat of an anachronism, having the role as ex officio, and the government has modernised boards and commissions to have more independence over a substantial period of time. That I also sit on the board of the museum and the art gallery and the library, but they have independent chairs enshrined in their legislation, and I've always found that an effective model where I can support as an ex officio member the governance of those institutions, but the chair is robustly independent and able to prosecute the interests more broadly, and in particular to be able to bring that as the chairperson, being able to bring that matter directly to the minister.
Now, paragraph 139 of your witness statement at page 0041, you refer to a disclosure that you made at a GWC meeting on the 23rd of February 2021. If we just turn that up, that's GWC.0016.0369. And at page 0002, the disclosure there is the requirement to work with Crown in relation to other portfolios. That one we'll focus on at the moment. You have identified that Crown Perth is a Crown Perth is a hospitality venue and provider, and you perceived a potential for a conflict of interest.
Well, not in case of liquor licensing, because we delegated that when I became Director General.
Yes, but the idea that Crown Perth is a venue for providing hospitality and services in the arts and cultural arena, do you perceive that as being a conflict of interest?
Crown obviously sits on the broader Burswood Reserve, and the activities that my broader department would get involved with would tend to be matters that would be within the reserve precinct, but not related to the casino activities.
Why did you make this disclosure?
This was at the time when we had a discussion at the meeting as to whether our current practice of making conflict of interest disclosures on a agenda by agenda basis was adequate, or whether we should try to look at having a register of much broader matters like past relationships and so on. And the members, who I met, most of whom, as you've alluded to, are fairly new, felt that a register model would be more effective. And in order to show leadership on that, I said, well, I would like to register these. I don't believe they are conflicts that would have appeared in our agenda papers related to agenda items, or if there had been, I would have already declared. but for the purposes of full disclosure, that though they knew my role more broadly in the department, that I wanted to formally have that recorded. So that was the purpose.
So you don't actually perceive yourself the fact that you have dealings with Crown in other capacities, that is an actual or potential conflict of interest?
I had very limited contact with Crown, simply saying that my portfolio had contact. I didn't personally pursue matters with Crown over those things. So, for instance, my department is a co-sponsor of Have a Go Day, which is held on the Burswood Reserve, and that's dealt with by my recreation division, who help organise that event. They might come into contact with Crown staff because Crown also support Have a Go Day. It's a very big social event for over 55s. But I know that the department has that event, which happens once a year. So I was laying out the framework that as a department we had those contacts. I had very little contact with Crown apart from those few regulatory officers around the actual Crown business before the Commission, and a couple of meetings which I think I've detailed in my evidence when Crown came in to see me to say, some of the issues they were confronting around their finances or employment of staff and so on.
But just to come back to my question, you made this disclosure, but you didn't actually consider it to be a conflict of interest, actual or perceived, that you have dealings with Crown in other portfolios?
I can certainly understand that perception conflicts can be held by anyone. I think the question is whether you can manage perception conflicts as opposed to, I've indicated that I don't believe I had any pecuniary or other conflicts or that I was conflicted in any decisions I took. But there could be a perception that if there was a sports event at Burswood and I was the Director General of Sport, maybe there's some issue there. My way of dealing with it, of course, would be not to attend any of these events and so on. But just holding the position of Director General of a broad-based agency opens up the view that people might perceive you conflicted in any number of things.
Well, looking at one of those any number of things, can I put this to you? Do you see it as leading to at least a perception of a conflict of interest if, say, in your sports portfolio, you are engaging or your portfolio is engaging with Crown, perhaps for the purpose of seeking a benefit by the provision of hospitality or a venue to hold a certain event, whilst at the same time, with your GWC hat on, being its regulator in respect of casino operations, and there might be a conflict where you perhaps prefer the interests of the sports portfolio over the interests of GWC in your engagement with Crown?
I could certainly perceive if that happened that would be a concern.
Do you see how that might give rise to a perception of a conflict?
Oh, yes.
And have you any thoughts, apart from an independent chair of GWC, as to how that might be addressed, that perception of conflict?
Retirement is looking very good.
Could it be addressed, do you think, by complete independence of the GWC from the department, financially, physically and structurally?
Yes, it could be.
Paragraph 50 of your witness statement, 0016, when you were making this point about the desirability of an independent chair, you say towards the bottom of that paragraph that the Director General could still attend GWC meetings on request or as an ex officio member. Is that something you would regard as desirable?
If the GWC was not, as you outlined in your previous question, entirely independent department with all of its own resources and relied on the department, they've been asked to attend meetings to account for the support they're getting, I think would be an important accountability that I would have to take on, or whoever was in my role would have to take on. But it should be at the discretion of the GWC as to whether you attended or not be a right to attend, but to be there and be required to attend if the GWC wishes to bring forward. I think that would be a good balance. Otherwise, GWC set in splendid isolation may well struggle to get the benefit that a Director General can bring to them of guidance and advice and other things. I've tried, I think, to be a very constructive chair in the time I've been there, bringing a whole range of perspectives into the room.
Now, paragraphs 111 to 117 of your witness statement, you give evidence in terms about your view that, and these are my words, not yours, Mr. Ord, but in terms you don't consider that that casino operations in Western Australia are sufficiently large to justify a separate casino regulator from the GWC. You recall that evidence?
Yes.
Does it impact on your view at all if you have specific regard to the complexity and technicality of the sorts of issues such as money laundering risks, the risks associated with junket tour operators and so forth? When you focus on those particularly, does that affect your view about whether or not there ought to be a separate specialist casino regulator?
I see an advantage in a national regulator because one assumes it would be constituted under federal legislation, and the powers they have to deal with the international exposure of casinos would be significant and significantly greater than a state jurisdiction could bring to bear, limited by state statute. So I do see that you could create a highly capable national entity that oversaw all casinos in Australia, and given that they may well be aggregating into a smaller number of owners with multiple casinos across jurisdictions, maybe some merit in that, because there are limits to how much you can understand in the nature of how the business has been governed, if it's got a lot of its central governance in another jurisdiction, as in the case of Crown. So that's where I would see an advantage. In terms of Western Australia only independent, then I was of the view that the Gaming Wagering Commission, with extended capabilities, could well be an adequate entity to govern the risks that have been identified, accepting that a number of these risks can actually be legislated against, rather than just simply accepted as a risk that's tolerable. And we just can put directions, as we have already done from the Gaming Wagering Commission, to limit some high-risk activities.
Right. Now, I want to come back to this point of conflicts of interest in a different way and go to the Statement of Information under Section 8A of the Royal Commissions Act, dated 15 April 2021. At page 0034, there's a mention here in the first full paragraph that the Code of Conduct of GWC was amended on the 23rd of March 2021 to reflect improved controls relating to recording and maintaining conflicts of interest. That was essentially to do with the maintenance of a register, is that right?
Yes.
And if we go to that document, which is gwc.001.0011.002, and page 0009, I think. Thank you. And there's a discussion there about conflicts of interest at the top of the page, third paragraph. Conflicts of interest can be a key risk area for the Commission members. Is this code of conduct only directed towards members or also to departmental staff who are engaging in GWC work?
This was developed for the Commission in its own right and has the same essential key elements of the department's code of conduct.
Who does it apply to?
This applies to the members of the Commission.
But it doesn't apply to departmental staff performing GWC work.
And they're covered under the department, because they're public sector employees, they're covered under the department's code of conduct, which requires the same declaration of conflicts and so on.
Well, you could have a public sector employee employed by GWC who was subject to the GWC code of conduct, couldn't you?
You could, yes.
So in any event, you say that the department code of conduct is in essentially the same terms as the GWC one.
Yes.
Here in the third paragraph, second sentence, you say it's almost, or it's not you, the author of this document, says it is almost inevitable members will have a conflict at some point, as they are either appointed to represent particular stakeholders or for their expertise in relationships with local governments, communities and private industry. Can you just, do you understand what's being said there?
Yes.
And can you explain that to me?
Yes, I think it's being aware that in this case, Crown is a significant business, employing 5,000 people. It interacts with all sorts of parts of the community, and that the members may well at some point come in contact through either their past or their current activities outside of the Commission, which brings them into conflict with, one of those elements. And so it was just to be there as a reminder that there's a broad range of stakeholders hanging off Crown, which you have to be aware of could pose a conflict.
But it's this expression of inevitability of a conflict that I was interested to explore with you.
I think it was just to heighten the fact that those risks aren't just there when you begin the role on the Commission, but may emerge over time, and therefore more are likely to emerge over time if you're sitting on the Commission for a period of years.
What about when we move away from the GWC members and we look at the actual departmental staff who administer the GWC Act for the GWC and administer the Casino Control Act? Do you have any concerns about an inherent conflict in an ongoing and long-term relationship between regulator and regulatee in terms of the long-term associations and relationships that are built up in the course of performing the regulator's function?
Yes.
All right, and what is that concern?
I think I did talk to this earlier when I indicated that Crown has, the casino's been there for over 40 years, or around 40 years. It's been a single regulator. We've got a large number of staff who have been there for quite a part of that journey. as regulators, and you have a large number of staff who have been involved in Crown. It's a very stable business, and people specialise, obviously, in their areas. That single regulator, single operator, and given that the way the Casino Control Act is written, that it is so prescriptive around the regulation that inevitably you have very close contact between regulatory officers and casino officers. And, you know, in a small town like Perth, inevitably people will form friendships or form, the sort of familiarisations that come from seeing someone over many years who you know. In addition to that, from time to time, staff have been employed by Crown that were former departmental staff because they have a requirement to have their own regulatory division. And I believe the department has probably employed ex-Crown staff because of their expertise in gaming operations. So there is a risk in that would of course concern me as Director General and Chair.
Are there any restrictions either way upon employing ex-Crown staff in the department or vice versa, employing ex-department staff by Crown within a certain period of them leaving their employment?
I'm not aware that there is a framework around that. I'm not aware that there has been that transition in recent years, but there may well have been in the past a movement of staff, or in fact I am certainly aware of a staff member from the department who went to Crown prior to my time as Director General. Whether there are any protocols around time out, I'm not aware of. There may be some merit in looking at that.
You're aware, are you, of these regular operational meetings held between Perth Casino and the department?
I'm aware that there is an operational committee, yes, that's where they work out the implementation of standards and, you know, various things that are updated as games or technology changes and so on.
And how often are those meetings held?
I've never attended one, and that they have been chaired by the Chief Casino Officer. So, you know, it's not something I've involved myself in.
Does the GWC board receive minutes of those meetings?
Not that I'm aware of, but the fact that they occur and the outcomes of those meetings are all part of the Chief Casino Officer's report. So Chief Casino Officer reports at each meeting on activities that they've undertaken. So it would generally be that if new standards have been introduced, the report would say that had been operationalised through the committee or something of that nature.
I turn to a slightly different topic now, Mr. Ord. If we go to page 0015 of your witness statement at paragraph 49. And you're describing there your overall management philosophy during your tenure as chairperson of GWC. And you set out what you have done in practice by enumerating in the sub-paragraphs below. Can I take you to little d, please? Where you talk about ensuring clarity in our purpose. That's GWC's purpose, I take it. Is it?
Yes.
Specifically of protecting the public interest and being a model regulator that uses powers with a presumption in favour of education and improvement over punishment. This is clarity of regulatory purpose. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
In other words, the reason for GWC's existence.
Yes.
And is that first and foremost in your mind protecting the public interest?
Yes.
And secondly, but also importantly, being a regulator that uses powers with a presumption in favour of education and improvement over punishment.
Yes.
Education of whom?
A lot of our regulation was dependent on the compliance of Crown staff who operate the casino to take their licence, very seriously. The requirements under that licence, the probity aspects of their employment and so on. And with such a large employer, then a lot of our business was identifying people when their licences were up for renewal or it became apparent to us because they self-referred that they had failed in, their reporting requirements to us around offences like traffic offences and things where they've been convicted in a court. So the whole range of things that says you have to report to the Gaming Wagering Commission. And there were a number of times when these things were not happening. We were calling people in. We did have the capacity to fine them or cancel their licence. Our belief was that that was highly punitive to do so, taking away someone's income. We thought that a better approach was to, firstly to obviously counsel them about and put them on notice, if you like, that they shouldn't repeat those matters. But we engage with Crown around their advocacy of requirements in the workplace. So, how was their training program, their induction program? Did they have notices of compliance, reminders around their buildings? Were they doing staff newsletters, and could they reinforce our compliance requirements in their communications with staff and so on? So that is a sort of case study of how that philosophy of actually trying to improve the overall compliance of Crown by working with them to improve their end of what we believe was a responsibility versus just purely penalising people that came before us but not attempting to get to the source of why they were failing in their compliance duties.
Right, now, just staying with this regulatory purpose as you've articulated it here at D, does that, on your understanding, or I'll put it this way, is that your understanding of the regulatory purpose in administering the Casino Control Act?
Not in its entirety. I was trying to give a sense of my philosophy because that was the question. So I can't say that it covers every possible aspect because there's obviously the full compliance with the Act and all the fundamentals of governance that comes in as well.
But the regulatory purpose, on your understanding, underpinning the Casino Control Act at least includes what you've set out in D?
Yes.
And regulating the Perth casino generally, your understanding of the regulatory purpose includes what you've set out in D?
I believe so.
Now, if I can take you to the Gaming and Wagering Commission Act at Section 7, there's duties of the Commission set out there in subsection 1, and you'll see that in little d for Donald, that's the paragraph of the subsection which speaks specifically to casino regulation. Your understanding of the duties of the GWC in relation to casino regulation, do you understand that the other paragraphs of subsection 1 in section 7 also apply to casino regulation?
Yes.
So, for example, paragraph BA. It's a duty of the GWC to do the things set out in BA in respect of casino regulation, as far as you understand.
Yes.
Right. Now, paragraph 54 of your witness statement at page 0017, you set out the main duties of the GWC as you understand them. Is that right?
Yes.
And those duties apply as much to your understanding of the duties in respect of casino regulation as to other forms of gaming and wagering regulation. Is that right?
Yes.
And at paragraph 123 of your witness statement at page 0036, we were here a little while ago, you talk about how the Racing, Gaming and Liquor Regulation Unit within the department is structured. You describe it as with the intention of ensuring confidence in the efficacy and integrity of Perth casino operations within GWC and so on. So that again is your understanding of the regulatory purpose as it pertains to casino regulation?
Yes.
And you go on to talk about the philosophy being centrally concerned with consumer protection, protection from unfair practices, security efficacy of gaming activities on the casino floor, and the casino's compliance with operating policies and procedures. And then you say, on reflection, this structure and approach has not been and is not sufficiently focused on Crown Group's corporate governance and Crown Resort Limited's propriety as a casino operator. Is it the case that simply by oversight or error of judgment, the GWC hasn't placed enough attention or emphasis on those matters of corporate governance of the Crown Group or Crown Resort Limited's propriety as a casino operator?
My view, obviously having read the Bergen inquiry, was that when I considered the totality of all the legislation that covers our regulation of Crown, then it clearly identifies that if the Gaming Wagering Commission has concerns around potential of corruption, then it has a responsibility to act. And my view is, how would we form that view? I went on to say that we don't have a licence, a periodic licence review mechanism where you would normally provide full scrutiny of all of the operators' governance processes, procedures and so on. But if we believed that there was a risk to the integrity of the casino, for instance, in a breach of anti-money laundering procedures, then we'd have a requirement under our current legislation to act. So my belief was that we had been very focused on compliance on the casino operating floor, but needed to have another level of compliance assessing related to strategic issues that I thought might be enhanced by some legislative amendments to it, but also around, certainly in the view that I believe a periodic review would be very useful to trigger that, but also that we could be reviewing elements of their corporate compliance at that other level, and making that a major part of the oversight of the Commission.
But putting aside any future amendments that might be made to the legislation, under the existing regulatory framework, are you saying that since reading the Bergen report and seeing the process of the Bergen inquiry, you now appreciate that the regulatory focus was too limited by the GWC.
Too operationally based, yes.
And can I just ask you this? You will have read the Casino Control Act
Yes.
in order to fulfil your role as chair,
Yes.
and considered carefully the duties and responsibilities that
Yes.
the GWC has. Is that something that other members of GWC are encouraged to do when they join the commission?
Yes.
If I just take you to section 19 capital B of the Casino Control Act, you would have been familiar with this section of the Act long before the Bergen inquiry, yes?
Yes.
And essentially the minister could divest a close associate of an operator of their financial interest in the operator. You understood that much.
Indeed.
And that was the minister's determination to make, but on advice of the commission.
Yes.
So is it your evidence that in the 4 years you were chair prior to the Bergen inquiry, it never occurred to you that it was a duty of the commission to be aware of suitability issues associated with close associates of the operator?
Oh no, we were very aware of that. Close associates are important ongoing business for the Commission as senior officers change to do the due diligence processes around them. So no, we're fully aware of that. My view is around...
How did you monitor it?
Well, if there was suitability assessment undertaken, then that report would come to the GWC.
But this is divesting somebody who is no longer a suitable person to be a close associate of an operator.
Yes, so had there been a belief that there was, that a person who was a senior associate was inappropriate, close associate, sorry, was unsuitable, then that matter would obviously have to be formed by the GWC, or the view of that would have to be formed by the GWC and then brought to the minister.
But how would you find that out?
Well, we engaged with our fellow regulators. As I said, we didn't have a periodic review. We weren't getting matters of concern raised by other agencies to say we have concern about a person who is a close associate of the casino. Obviously, when the media was raising concerns about some practices at Crown, then we went into the mode of seeking responses from Crown as to what their views were of what happened, what they were planning to do about any failings there and so on.
Can I just ask you to pause there? If we look at the position before Bergen and before the media allegations, just looking at section 19B, was it your position that the GWC took more of a reactive pose if somebody else brought to their attention a question about the suitability of a close associate, then it might respond to that or look into it further? But it wasn't proactive in the sense of setting up some kind of approach to monitor on a regular or ongoing basis the suitability of close associates of the operator.
I believe that's true. I mean, I didn't take up my responsibilities till July 2017, and it wasn't very long thereafter that I became engaged in matters related to Crown and the junket business, for instance, from mainland China had already been suspended prior to me taking on the role. That was at the end of 2016 and so on. So we were already engaged in the beginning of what has gone on, what's happening, and considering all those issues that would have led to, and is there someone responsible that is a close associate if there is wrongdoing, and it progressed from there. The Bergen inquiry interceded in the beginning of our working out whether we should in fact go towards an inquiry, and we participated in supporting that inquiry. So I don't know, to answer your question, what happened prior to my time, but from the time that I was engaged, we certainly, as a commission, were significantly concerned about the matters that were coming before us, and working out the appropriate way of ourselves and with our fellow regulators in other states to establish a process to identify whether there were matters that we needed to independently investigate or investigate in unison with other regulators.
Can I take you to paragraph 21, capital A, subsection 4, please? And subsection 4, over the page probably. Yes. So subsection 4 empowers the Commission, where it thinks fit, to report to the Minister and make recommendations about any actions to be taken under section 21B. If we go to 21 capital B subsection 3, you'll see there that the Minister may, in the public interest, censure the licensee, suspend the licence, terminate an agreement other than the casino complex agreement, and impose a penalty. Now, did you have that provision and 21A4 in your mind when you were, throughout the 4 years to date that you've been chairperson of GWC?
Yes.
And was the regulatory approach of the GWC much the same as it was in relation to 19B? Reactive, in the sense that if something came across its desk, to alert it to a reason why you might consider reporting to the Minister in respect of a potential course of action under 21B, then you'd look at it, but otherwise you didn't proactively monitor the casino operator, the licensee, in that regard?
No, I think we were very concerned. We were picking up, obviously, because of the way the news stories have been prepared, that there were activities in Crown Melbourne of concern, and there were a series of things that came out, everything from putting guitar picks into gaming machines and so on. And we constantly came back to say, could these things be happening in the casino in Perth? And undertake our own sort of due diligence checks with staff and so on, and also, of course, bringing Crown in for questioning, and recognising that if there was a failure in Melbourne, a critical failure around their responsibilities, particularly around the Anti-Money Laundering Counter-Terrorism Act reporting requirements, that the Victorian Gaming regulator would, in our sharing of information, regularly advise us that there was a risk that we should then also take on ourselves. and so we were very heightened and in a heightened state for a period of time to see what was going to come out of some investigation. So we knew the Victorians were undertaking investigation and had agreed they'd share information with us, and we were awaiting that. Said when Bergen came, and this is all compacted to a short period of time as far as I was concerned, I was approached by the federal government to cooperate with Bergen, and I took the view, well, they're going to be drawing on our resources and our intelligence in Western Australia. It's a very high level Royal Commission, and was intended to be a Royal Commission, and that we'll get the benefit of them undertaking that very high level review, which indeed Commissioner Bergen did an outstanding job.
But what about before Bergen, Mr. Ord?
Well, before Bergen, I'm not aware of what happened from 2016 into 17, when Crown first suspended their China operations. Other than I was aware that Crown had been saying to the Gaming Wagering Commission that they believe they'd operated legally, and that the changes to Chinese view of what was permissible had brought about the risk to their business, and that they were suspending that line of business from China. So we were seeing that Crown was attempting to deal with rising matters of concern that was coming forward by de-risking themselves, and that we were observing that in practice by the fact that the junket business was ending in Western Australia, reduced to a very small level, and we were awaiting the outcome of some other inquiries, essentially create an evidence base on the basis of which I could go to the Minister and say either we believe there should be inquiry, or Minister, we've identified there's some wrongdoing in Crown that would require a notice to be served.
Commissioners, I just noticed the time, and I'd probably be a little bit longer. Mr. Ord will obviously have to come back.
Yes.
It may be appropriate to simply hold the balance of this questioning over until then.
Yes. Should we try? We're conscious of the fact that while Mr. Ord remains under examination, he has limited access to his advisors. So I think what we might do, Ms. Carl, is suggest that in the morning, first thing in the morning, we give the other parties the opportunity to examine and to re-examine, and then that will finish this aspect of it. But we're quite aware that there are other issues which have not yet been probed, so Mr. Ord will have to come back for a further session. But I think that might be the appropriate course. But just for planning purposes, could I get an idea of time? But
no more than 5 minutes, I think, to finish at the stage.
Mr. Evans?
I might fill out the half hour from Mr. Damanander's 5 minutes, so perhaps 20 minutes or so, to clarify a couple of matters that have come to my attention.
And Mr. Parham?
Commissioners, there will be no questions from me on this topic.
And you've got a feeling for re-examination?
I only would at the moment have maybe 5 minutes, but it obviously will depend on the questions from my other learned friends.
Yeah, all right. Well, I think what we'll do is take Mr. Ord at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, so then we can complete this section of it, and then that gives him some greater liberty in relation to speaking to advisors. And then we'll move to Mr. Sargent. All right. And Mr. Ward, can you not speak to anyone about your evidence, and certainly not speak to any other people whom you know are on the witness list to be called later on?
Understood.
Thank you. We'll adjourn to 10 a.m.
I'm sorry, Commissioners, the application with respect to non-publications, that'll be stood over till tomorrow, is that right?
Yes, the witness statement is public,
Yes,
but not the documents.
thank you.
10 a.m.
All rise.
Paul, do you want to go first then?
Well, on what